Chapter 1. First Encounter. The morning light was dim and the town slowly woke up from its sleep. The soft light was like a layer of gauze, gently covering Main Street. The buildings on the street were reflected in this warm color, revealing a simple charm. The copper bell at the door of the warm corner café swayed gently in the breeze, making a crisp sound as if greeting everyone passing by. 25-year-old Sophie, with her golden curly hair tied casually behind her head, a few strands of hair playfully fell on her cheeks. She was wearing a pair of jeans that were washed a little bleached, paired with a simple white t-shirt with coffee stains on it, which was the medal of her busy work. At this moment she was humming a song, shuttling around the café, preparing to welcome guests for a new day. Her eyes were full of love for life, and there was always a bright smile on the corner of her mouth. That smile was like the warm spring sun, which could instantly dispel the haze in people's hearts. "Good morning, Sophie." Tom, an old customer, pushed the door open and greeted her with a smile. "Good morning, Mr. Tom. Still the same, a latte with extra milk foam, right?" Sophie responded while preparing the coffee machine skillfully. "Yes, you still understand me." Tom sat down in the old seat watching Sophie's busy figure, and a smile unconsciously appeared on his face. Just then the door of the café was pushed open again and a figure walked in. He is 27-year-old Daniel, who works in a financial company. Today he is wearing a neat black suit, his hair is meticulously groomed, and his leather shoes are polished, which is somewhat out of tune with the atmosphere of this café full of life. There is a little fatigue on his face, but his eyes reveal the desire for a moment of relaxation. Daniel looked around and chose a seat by the window. He took out his mobile phone and casually flipped through the news, trying to temporarily forget the pressure of work in this short break time. "Hello, welcome. What would you like to order?" Sophie walked over enthusiastically, holding a menu in her hand, and the smile on her face made people feel particularly friendly. Daniel raised his head and his eyes fell on Sophie. Her smile was like a ray of light, instantly brightening his somewhat dull mood. "A cup of American coffee, thank you." His voice was low and magnetic. "Okay, it's ready soon." Sophie turned to the coffee machine and began to make coffee skillfully. Her movements were light and smooth as if she was completing an elegant dance. However, accidents always come unexpectedly. Just as she reached out to take the coffee beans, her elbow accidentally touched a bag of coffee beans. The bag shook and then with a crash, the coffee beans were like a group of naughty elves, scattered all over the floor. "Oh no!" Sophie exclaimed and hurriedly squatted down to pick it up. Her face flushed slightly, full of annoyance. "I'm so sorry, I'm so careless. It's all my fault for not having breakfast this morning and I feel dizzy." Seeing this, Daniel also hurriedly got up to help. "Let me help you." He squatted down, his movements were neat and steady, in stark contrast to the flustered Sophie. The two of them were busy picking up the coffee beans on the ground. Sophie couldn't help muttering while picking them up, "Oh, today is really a bad start. Yesterday I added cinnamon powder to the guest's cappuccino as sugar." After drinking it, the old lady said that this was the most Christmas-like coffee she had ever tasted. It was so embarrassing. Daniel couldn't help but smile when he heard her words. "It's okay, everyone is careless sometimes. Besides, it's not good to skip breakfast. It's not good for your health." There was a hint of concern in his voice. After cleaning up, Sophie brought a cup of steaming American coffee to Daniel, and the cup was still steaming. "This is your coffee, I hope you like it. This cup is mine, free, as an apology for my mistake." Her eyes were sincere and bright. Daniel took the coffee, looked at Sophie's clear eyes and smiled slightly. "Thank you, I'm sure you will like it very much." He took a sip of coffee lightly and the bitter taste spread on the tip of his tongue, but unexpectedly made him feel relaxed. Sophie returned to the workbench and continued to be busy. But her thoughts drifted to Daniel from time to time. She felt that this boy was very special and different from the people she usually came into contact with. There was a calmness and gentleness in his eyes that made people want to get close. Daniel was also tasting the coffee and his affection for Sophie gradually increased. Her optimism and enthusiasm were like a clear spring, flowing into his originally monotonous life, diluting the pressure and fatigue at work. As time went by, the number of customers in the café gradually decreased. Sophie took a rag to wipe the table while she was free. She walked to Daniel's table and said with a smile, "Sir, do you need another cup of coffee?" The weather is so good today, and with our coffee, you will definitely have a perfect morning. Daniel looked at Sophie's energetic appearance, and a warm current surged in his heart. He shook his head gently and said, "No, thank you. I have to go back to the company, otherwise the boss will give me trouble." Sophie stuck out her tongue playfully. "That won't work, work is important. But remember to come back when you have time, you are always welcome here." Daniel stood up, straightened his suit and said, "Oh, I will. Thank you for your coffee and your enthusiasm." He turned and left the cafe. The sun shone on him, outlining a tall figure. Sophie stood at the door and watched him leave, as if a deer was running around in her heart. She returned to the workbench and continued to be busy, but Daniel's figure and their conversation kept echoing in her mind. This day was an ordinary and special day for Sophie and Daniel. Because on this day their life trajectories quietly intersected, bringing new colors and expectations to each other's lives. And the life of the small town still continues in the sun, full of countless possibilities and warm stories. Just like this cup of American coffee, it seems simple, but inadvertently, it brings unexpected surprises and touches to people. Chapter 2. Meeting Again. Before the morning mist had dispersed, the bell in the warm corner rang for the 7th time. Sophie was adjusting the newly arrived Guatemalan coffee beans. When she heard the familiar sound of leather shoes, she reflexively reached for her apron pocket. There were 4 notes folded into paper cranes, and the latest one read, "It is recommended to use 30 grams of coffee powder with 180 milliliters of water. P.S. Yesterday's caramel macchiato was too sweet." Daniel sat down in his old seat and found that next to the Wall Street Journal he often read, there was an old copy of Harry Potter, with half a melted crayon between the pages. When Sophie brought the coffee over, he noticed that her hairband had been replaced with a cloth decoration in the shape of coffee beans, which reminded him of how she used the salt shaker as a sugar shaker last week and was so anxious that she drew an apology sign on the coffee cup with caramel sauce. "Try this." Sophie handed over a carved glass jar mysteriously. The liquid inside was a strange fluorescent green. "I've just developed the Wizard of Oslo, which uses spinach juice and matcha powder. This color reminds me of the washing liquid in the university laboratory." Daniel pushed his glasses, but changed his words when he saw Sophie's mouth suddenly drooping. "But the taste should be very refreshing." When the first sip of grassy coffee slid into his throat, his eyelashes trembled slightly. Sophie twisted her apron string nervously and watched him take out mints from his suit pocket. This was a habit he discovered when he visited for the 3rd time, and he would subconsciously reach for his pocket whenever he encountered food that was difficult to eat. "Actually," Daniel said vaguely, holding a mint in his mouth, "it's much better than the last time you mistakenly sprinkled chili powder into the hot cocoa instead of cinnamon powder." Sophie's laughter startled the old cat at the next table and pricked up its ears. She suddenly seemed to remember something and took out a notebook from under the counter. On the cover, Sophie's wonderful idea was written crookedly. Turning to the latest page, there was a picture of a coffee bean in a suit chasing the sun in an apron. "Look, this is the beginning of my new story." Her fingertips poked a small dent on the paper. "The protagonist is a magician who can make coffee. Every time he mixes a spell, he will knock something over." Daniel looked at the coffee bean crumbs on the ends of her hair and suddenly reached out to remove them for her. This action made both of them stunned at the same time. The morning light just passed through the Wizard of Oz latte in the glass jar, casting a mottled green shadow on the back of their overlapping hands. "I think a magician should have a strict assistant." When Daniel retracted his hand, the touch of Sophie's hair was still on his fingertips. For example, the alchemist who always corrects his formula ratio. "Then call him Daniel." Sophie scribbles the name excitedly next to the painting. "Alchemist Daniel, always wearing a 3-piece suit. Even the laboratory must maintain a 0.5-meter cleaning radius." When the afternoon sun stretched the shadows of the 2 people, Sophie suddenly took out a basket covered with floral cloth from under the counter. The moment it was opened, coffee beans and chocolate chips poured like a waterfall on Daniel's Wall Street Journal. One of the coffee beans rolled into his coffee cup, and the splashing ripples tore a crack on the heart of the latte art. "This is..." Daniel looked at the mess on the table, but swallowed his complaints when he saw the stars in Sophie's eyes. "Inspiration collector." She sorted the coffee beans into patterns of stars and moons by shape, Put new ideas in every time you have them, and when you have enough, you can write a novel. Daniel noticed a yellowed sticky note on the edge of the basket, with childish handwriting on it. Write 100 stories and become a great writer. He took out a pen and added on the blank space of the sticky note. The first story, the caffeine war between the magician and the alchemist. As dusk deepened, Sophie found a new note under Daniel's coffee cup. It is recommended to collect inspiration every Wednesday at 3 p.m. P.S. The Wizard of Oz latte needs to be reformulated. She smiled and folded the note into the 6th paper crane. Suddenly, she heard the crisp bird song coming from outside the window. It was the robin that was startled and flew away when Daniel visited for the second time, and it was now combing its feathers on the wire. The copper bell rang softly in the evening breeze. Sophie looked at the green liquid gradually settling in the glass jar, and suddenly felt that it looked very much like the color of Daniel's eyes in the sun. She lowered her head and wrote a new chapter title in her notebook. When the alchemist begins to look forward to coffee spills on Tuesdays. As the tip of her pen moved across the paper, a robin outside the window happened to pick up a coffee bean from the basket. Chapter 3. Misunderstanding and Conflict. Raindrops of rain in the rainy season entwine the plane trees on Main Street like silver threads, and fine water droplets condense on the glass of the warm corner café. When Sophie stuffed the last cardboard box into her friend's pickup truck, she suddenly remembered the inspiration collection day she had agreed with Daniel on Tuesday. She hurriedly checked the watch, and the pointer on the dial pointed to 3:17, a full 17 minutes late. Daniel sat in his usual seat with his suit jacket draped over the back of the chair, revealing the faint coffee stains on his shirt cuffs. This was left when Sophie poured hot cocoa on him last week, but he unusually didn't send it to dry cleaning. The American coffee in front of him was already cold, and the edge of the cup was stained with his unconscious teeth marks. When he looked at the wall clock for the nth time, he found that the swing of the minute hand was very similar to Sophie's dancing when she spoke. Daniel. Sophie rushed into the café, her hair still dripping with rain, holding a coffee bean-shaped pillow rescued from the moving site. I'm so sorry. Mary's refrigerator was stuck in the stairwell, and we spent 2 hours trying to figure it out. It's okay. Daniel's voice was as straight as his suit. I just thought you would call in advance. His knuckles unconsciously rubbed the notepad, where he was going to give Sophie a new suggestion. Indoor activities should be chosen for collecting inspiration on rainy days, and here's a list of recommended movies to watch for singin' in the rain. Sophie noticed the fog on his glasses, and suddenly remembered the last time they had squeezed in front of the French window of the café to watch the rainbow on a rainy day, and Daniel's glasses were also covered with such white fog. She took out a wet note from her apron pocket, on which was a picture of a coffee bean in moving clothes chasing a clock in a suit and tie. Look, this is a new plot I thought of on the way. Maybe you should change into dry clothes first. When Daniel stood up, the chair rubbed against the floor with a sharp sound. After all, a cold will affect work efficiency. He left without looking back, leaving Sophie standing on the water-stained floor with a pillow in her arms, and saw a blank note under his coffee cup. This was the first time in 3 months that there was no neat handwriting. For the next 3 days, the copper bell of the café became particularly harsh. Every time Sophie looked up, she hoped to see the familiar suit, but she was only disappointed. She placed a Daniel's exclusive inspiration box next to the cash register, which was filled with newly written story fragments and apology notes, and even the improved version of the caramel sauce recipe he mentioned last time. But the man who always arranged coffee beans into constellation patterns suddenly disappeared in the morning mist as if evaporated. On Thursday morning, Sophie found a strange silver thermos cup next to the coffee machine. The moment she opened it, the aroma of cinnamon and caramel hit her face. There was a note on the bottom of the cup. It is recommended to drink hot drinks on rainy days. P.S. Mary's refrigerator has been contacted by a professional moving company. She laughed while holding the cup, but her tears fell on the note paper, blurring the word professional. Daniel stood in the bookstore across the street, watching Sophie turning around with the thermos cup through the window. His fingers unconsciously turned the pages of Pride and Prejudice. There was a note wet by rain between the pages. On it was Sophie's handwriting. The magician's assistant disappeared because his toes were run over by the pumpkin carriage. When the warm yellow light of the café in the twilight came on, Daniel's phone suddenly vibrated. In the photo Sophie sent, she filled Daniel's exclusive inspiration box with star-shaped coffee beans with the caption, "The Alchemist laboratory was hit by a meteor and needs emergency rescue." He looked at the SOS signal made of coffee beans in the photo and finally smiled for the first time in 3 days. The pen in his pocket left a dent in his palm. He took out a notepad and wrote after the pen tip hovered on the paper for 3 seconds. Suggested rescue actions include but are not limited to 1. Check the insurance of the pumpkin carriage. 2. Prepare double caramel sauce. 3. Recalibrate the coffee grind. In the rain, Daniel folded the note into a paper airplane and watched it pass through the rain marks on the glass window and gently landed on the counter that Sophie was wiping. When she looked up, their eyes met through the rain curtain, as if they saw each other's stories waiting to be continued. The copper bell rang softly in the evening breeze, and Sophie folded the new note into the 7th paper crane. This time there was a line of small words on its wings. When the alchemist began to study how to make the paper crane waterproof. Chapter 4. Reconciliation. The dense rain wove in a hazy net on Main Street, and the raindrops kept hitting the ground, splashing small water. The neon sign of the Warm Corner Café reflected colorful light and shadow in the puddles, swaying slightly with the waves. Sophie tightly grasped the leather notebook that the customer had forgotten, and rushed into the rain curtain anxiously. Every step her canvas shoes took would splash a string of water on the water surface, outlining crooked commas on the road surface, as if reflecting her panic at the moment. "This is the 3rd time someone has left something behind this week," she muttered. "The café should really be renamed Lost and Found." Sophie trotted all the way, humming the untune of Singin' in the Rain in her mouth. It was the movie she and Daniel watched together last week. The cheerful melody brought her some comfort on this rainy day. Daniel had just finished a long meeting, and the black umbrella in his hand was skillfully turned at his fingertips, forming a vague circle. When he saw the familiar golden figure suddenly slipping and falling at the corner of the street from across the street, with the notebook in his hand flying far away, his heart suddenly tightened and his body reacted instantly. Before his brain had time to think, he had already crossed the street quickly and held the umbrella firmly above Sophie's head. The rain slid down the umbrella and wet the hem of his suit, and the color became darker like a smudged ink painting. "Are you going to run for the best clerk of the year?" Daniel reached out and pulled her up with a slight smile on his lips, but his eyes were full of concern. He noticed that the coffee stains on Sophie's knees and the new mud spots were intertwined, forming a strange and unique pattern. "Who vowed to write a recommendation letter to the umbrella company last time?" he added, trying to make the atmosphere more relaxed. Sophie raised her face, and the rain kept sliding down her eyelashes, hitting tiny ripples on Daniel's lenses, making him a little hazy in her eyes. At this moment she suddenly remembered the scene when they first met. At that time there were naughty coffee beans stuck in his Oxford shoes. At this moment the shoes were soaked in the stagnant water, feeling the sudden rain with her. "But..." She shook the notebook in her hand that was still dripping with water and said anxiously, "There is a memoir of World War II written by an old grandfather. He said that this is his graduation gift for his grandson. It means a lot to them. I must return it." Daniel's fingers subconsciously rubbed gently on the umbrella handle, where Sophie's smiley face graffiti drawn with colored pens last week was still there. Now it was washed by rain and the color was a little faded, but the warm memory was still vivid. After listening to Sophie's words he didn't say anything more, but quickly took off his suit jacket, gently wrapped Sophie's slightly trembling shoulders, and stood in the rain wearing only a thin shirt. "Go back to the cafe and get a hairdryer first, don't catch a cold," he said in a gentle but firm voice, and then took out the waterproof notepad from his inner pocket. "Write down your cold symptoms, I have to update the emergency plan." The two rushed into the cafe, soaked, and the bell at the door was jingling. The old cat, who was napping under the counter, was awakened by the sudden noise, and came out from under the counter in dissatisfaction, shaking his fur in disgust as if complaining that they broke the peace. Sophie didn't care about these. She hurried to the oven, took out the spare blanket and wrapped herself in it. At this time she inadvertently glimpsed that Daniel's shirt was soaked by rain, tightly attached to his body, and faintly outlined the coffee cup tattoo under his collarbone. That was the tattoo he ran to get last week when she wasn't paying attention, in the name of commemorating a moment of caffeine-induced inspiration explosion. "Actually," Sophie, wrapped in a blanket, walked behind the counter and pushed a cup of steaming hot cocoa in front of Daniel. The marshmallows on the edge of the cup seemed to be deliberately making trouble, and they just stuck to Daniel's eyelashes, making him look a little funny. Sophie couldn't help laughing when she saw this scene, but she quickly put away her smile and became serious. I really didn't mean to be late that day. Mary's refrigerator was stuck in the stairwell and we couldn't get it out. We struggled for a long time. Moreover, the pumpkin latte ice cream I made last year was frozen in the refrigerator. I was afraid that it would melt, so I was even more anxious. I know. Daniel interrupted her, his eyes behind the lenses sparkling, flashing with understanding and tolerance. He reached out from the inner pocket of his suit and took out the note that was slightly wrinkled by the rain. On it was his newly written laboratory rules. Article 47. Always believe in the magician's improvisation even if the refrigerator becomes a frozen laboratory. He handed the note to Sophie with a smile on his lips. Sophie looked at the note and burst into laughter. The rain on her eyelashes fell into the hot cocoa, creating circles of small ripples, just like the misunderstanding between them finally slowly dissipated. She suddenly remembered something, walked quickly under the counter and dragged out a cardboard box with great effort. The cardboard box was filled with sticky notes written during their past exchanges, some of which were folded into paper cranes, some were pieced into constellations, and some were cut into various interesting shapes. Look. She pointed excitedly at a paper airplane at the top, her eyes sparkling. The paper airplane you flew in last week, I transformed it into a flying coffee pot in the story. In my story, it can take people through time and space to find the most delicious coffee. The rain gradually stopped, and the sun shone through the gaps in the clouds and sprinkled in the café. A gorgeous rainbow was reflected on the floor, adding a bit of fantasy to this warm space. Daniel helped Sophie hang the wet clothes next to the dryer, and inadvertently found a half-cut crayon sticking out of her apron pocket. That was the one she used to draw the magic map when they first discussed Harry Potter. When his fingertips touched the crayon, Sophie seemed to be touched by something, and suddenly stood on tiptoe and printed a coffee-flavored kiss on his cheek. As a thank you, I'll treat you tonight. Sophie just started to speak but was interrupted by Daniel. Caramel sauce, roasted coffee beans. Daniel smiled and said, looking at Sophie's surprised expression, he couldn't help but smile with dimples. Don't think I don't know the dark dishes you secretly developed. But I'm looking forward to it, maybe there will be unexpected surprises. Sophie smiled and stuffed a few coffee beans into his shirt pocket, where he still had the pumpkin festival ticket he gave her last week. When her fingertips gently brushed the coffee cup tattoo under his collarbone, Daniel's ear tip turned slightly red. This subtle change was seen by the robin resting outside the window. It flapped its wings and flew towards the eaves covered with wisteria flowers, as if it couldn't wait to share this sweet moment with the world. On this afternoon after the rain, the café was filled with warmth and sweetness. The misunderstanding between Sophie and Daniel was completely eliminated, and their feelings were sublimated in the rain. Those little frictions and little awkwardness in the past have all turned into the tacit understanding and sweetness of smiling at each other at this moment. In the days ahead, they know that there will be more challenges and fun things waiting for them, but at this moment, they are just enjoying the hard-earned reconciliation and happiness, and looking forward to creating more beautiful memories together. Chapter 5. Warming up the relationship. The sycamore leaves on Main Street were dyed honey-colored, and the colorful flags of the pumpkin festival rustled in the autumn wind. Sophie put a coffee bean-shaped hairpin in her curly hair and ran to the pumpkin field, pulling Daniel's sleeve. The corn stalks crushed by her heels made a crisp crackling sound. In her canvas bag, half a can of caramel sauce appeared. This was her secret weapon for seasoning the pumpkin lanterns. Are you sure you want to participate in the carving competition? Daniel looked at the carving toolkit stuffed into his hand. The professional carving knife and protractor inside reminded him of the company's data analysis meeting. Last year's champion carved Mona Lisa out of a pumpkin. Then let's carve a Mona Lisa who can drink coffee. Sophie stood on tiptoe in front of the stall and looked around. Suddenly she pointed in a certain direction and exclaimed, "Look! That pumpkin is carved into a Wall Street bull with celery stuck in its nostrils." Daniel looked in the direction of her finger and saw a muscular pumpkin bull lying on a giant pumpkin, with a note between its horns that said, "Bull market must win." He subconsciously touched the inner pocket of his suit. There was the pumpkin carving geometry he prepared for Sophie, and between the pages were the drafts they drew last week. When the host announced the start of the competition, Sophie had already stuffed 3 pumpkins with caramel sauce. This is the magic fuel for the jack-o'-lantern. She lowered her voice mysteriously. Once the candles are lit, the whole town will be filled with the aroma of caramel. Daniel's carving knife drew precise arcs on the surface of the pumpkin, and he planned to replicate the outline of the café. Sophie dug a big hole in her pumpkin and stuffed coffee beans and cinnamon sticks into it. This is a talking coffee pumpkin. It will say, "Another cup?" Suddenly, the pumpkin cow in the next stall collapsed, and the celery horns pierced the pumpkin carriage next to it. Sophie laughed so hard that she fell backwards and her hands shook, and she smeared the caramel sauce all over Daniel's suit cuffs. Oops. She hurriedly wiped it with her apron. This color matches the coffee cup tattoo you got last week. Daniel looked at the caramel stains on his cuffs and suddenly remembered the coffee beans she spilled when they first met. He put down the carving knife, grabbed Sophie's hand and pressed it on his pumpkin, leaving 5 caramel fingerprints. This is what our work looks like. When the judges walked to their booth, Sophie's pumpkin lantern suddenly poofed caramel steam, scaring the judges to step back half a step. Daniel quickly took out the backup plan, the caramel coffee beans he had roasted in advance. This is the edible decoration of the pumpkin lantern. This is the most flavorful pumpkin lantern I've ever seen. The judge tasted a coffee bean. But this talking design is very interesting, especially when the steam sprayed out. It really seemed to say, "Drink me." In the end, Sophie's caramel magic pumpkin won the most creative award, and Daniel's Café pumpkin won the best detail award. When presenting the award, Sophie excitedly raised the trophy above her head, and the pumpkin decoration on the trophy suddenly rolled down and fell into Daniel's coffee cup. It seems that our jack-o'-lantern needs a fall prevention device. Daniel fished out the pumpkin decoration and drew a hook pattern on the wall of the cup with caramel sauce. Sophie took the opportunity to smear the caramel sauce on the tip of his nose, and laughed to tears at his petrified expression. As night fell, thousands of jack-o'-lanterns lit up Main Street. Sophie and Daniel sat on the terrace of the café, watching their jack-o'-lanterns flickering at the end of the street. "You know what?" Sophie rested her chin on Daniel's shoulder. "Just now the judges said that my jack-o'-lantern reminded him of the hot cocoa that was spilled on our first date." Daniel looked down at the pumpkin hairpin in her hair, and suddenly remembered the morning 3 months ago when she sprinkled cinnamon powder in his coffee as sugar. He took out a velvet box from his suit pocket, and inside it lay a coffee bean-shaped ring. Maybe we should add a new function to the jack-o'-lantern, such as witnessing a proposal. Sophie's exclamation startled the robin under the eaves, and her pumpkin hairpin fell into the caramel sauce. But in Daniel's eyes it became the most perfect proposal background. When their pumpkin lanterns flickered in the distance, the pumpkin lanterns on Main Street seemed to be lit up for them, and the caramel aroma in the air was the sweetest magic of this autumn. One evening in late autumn, they huddled in a corner of the library. Daniel was reading the Financial Times, and Sophie was drawing a coffee bean man on his shoulder. When the tip of her pen poked his tie clip, he suddenly closed the newspaper. "There is a Renaissance-themed market next weekend, and I have reserved the Alchemist's booth." Sophie's eyes were as bright as the flames in the pumpkin lantern. "Then I want to be a magician. We can sell talking coffee grounds for divination. The premise is that you have to learn to distinguish sage from coffee beans." Daniel tapped her nose. "Last time you put rosemary in my American coffee and the result was... But you drank 3 cups and said it was refreshing." Sophie smiled and smeared the coffee grounds on his newspaper. "Look. Does this shape look like our inspiration collector?" The café in the twilight lit up with warm yellow lights, and the old cat napped at their feet. Daniel wrapped Sophie's hand in his palm and found that the knuckles of her ring finger had calluses left by years of holding a pen. He silently noted in his heart, "It's time to buy a fountain pen with a coffee bean pattern." Chapter 6. Proposal. The spring sunshine flows like melted toffee on Main Street. On the terrace of the Warm Corner Café, wisteria flowers fall like waterfalls on the white iron fence. When Sophie was blindfolded by Daniel and led to the terrace, she smelled the familiar aroma of caramel and coffee beans, the smell of Guatemalan coffee beans she spilled when they first met. 3, 2, 1. Daniel's voice was trembling with a rare tremor. When the silk scarf slipped in front of Sophie's eyes, she saw that the terrace had been transformed into a fantasy world of coffee beans. The paper cranes they had folded were hanging between the wisteria flowers, and the contents of the past notes were written on each wing. The coffee beans in the glass jar formed the constellation map of S+D, and in the center was the coffee cup pumpkin lantern they carved at the pumpkin festival, which was now shining with warm light. This is. Sophie's fingers stroked the notes hanging on the vines and found that they were all apology letters and story drafts she wrote to Daniel. On one of the yellowed paper crane wings was written, "If the alchemist turns into a pumpkin, how much caramel sauce should the magician use to turn him back?" When Daniel knelt on one knee, the moss on the terrace stained his suit trouser legs. In the velvet box he opened, the ring holder was made of the coffee beans they collected, and the main diamond was inlaid with fine caramel amber. It was Sophie's birthday gift to him last year. "Remember when you said my carving was too neat at the pumpkin festival?" His voice trembled slightly in the fragrance of flowers. "This time I used 372 coffee beans, which is exactly the number of days we met." Sophie suddenly laughed out loud, but her tears fell on the heart made of coffee beans. "You actually counted it?" When she reached out to take the ring, the note he wrote on their first date slipped out of her cuffs. "It is recommended to prepare waterproof tissues when proposing, and the load-bearing capacity of 3 types of coffee beans has been tested." Applause rang out from all around, and Sophie realized that the terrace was full of townspeople. Mary held up her refrigerator that almost caused misunderstanding with a sticker of Best Witness of Love Award on it. The bookstore owner held Harry Potter, with their illustrations of the coffee wizard between the pages. Even the old cat who often came wore a bow tie in the shape of coffee beans and squatted next to the pumpkin lantern to take a nap. "Wait." Sophie suddenly broke free from Daniel's arms and rushed into the cafe. When she came back with a basket covered with floral cloth, coffee beans and chocolate chips were sprinkled on the proposal scene like raindrops. "This is." Daniel looked at the mess on the ground, but was stunned when he saw the manuscript in the basket. Published sample of The Caffeine War Between Magicians and Alchemists. Sophie put the book with a gold-stamped cover into his hand, with coffee beans from their first meeting between the pages. The editor said that the chapter about rescue in rainy days made her laugh until she cried. Daniel turned to the page with the ginkgo leaf, which read, "When the alchemist found that the first rule of his laboratory became, always believe in Sophie's inspiration, he knew that he had lost the war but won the entire universe." He looked up at the coffee bean crumbs on Sophie's nose, and suddenly remembered her flustered appearance when they first met. So, when he put the ring on her ring finger, the coffee bean holder just fit her pen cocoon. "Are you willing to let this magician who always knocks things over be my lifelong assistant?" When Sophie tiptoed to kiss him, the pumpkin lantern suddenly poofed caramel steam, startling the old cat to jump onto the wisteria trellis. Amid the applause and cheers, Daniel heard her whisper in his ear, "I do, but you have to learn how to fold a ring box with coffee beans first." As dusk fell, a new note was posted in the window of the cafe. "Today's special, Latte to commemorate a successful proposal plus, get a free signed book by the author." Sophie leaned on Daniel's shoulder, watching their story circulated among the townspeople, and suddenly found that a coffee bean seedling had grown in the gap between the tiles on the terrace. This was the most beautiful surprise of spring. Chapter 7. Happiness continues. The hustle and bustle of the wedding gradually faded away, and life returned to peace. Sophie and Daniel's days in the small town were still full of warmth and romance. In the morning, the sun shone through the thin curtains and sprinkled in their warm little house. Daniel always got up a little earlier than Sophie. He walked into the kitchen quietly to prepare breakfast for the two of them. The buzzing sound of the coffee machine came from the kitchen. It was the coffee machine they chose together. Every time he heard this sound, it seemed to awaken every cell in his body. "Dear, get up, breakfast is ready." Daniel walked to the bed, gently stroked Sophie's hair and gently woke her up. Sophie opened her eyes sleepily, looked at the man in front of her with eyes full of love, and raised the corners of her mouth, revealing a happy smile. "Morning, dear." She stretched and sat up from the bed. The two sat at the dining table enjoying a simple and warm breakfast. On the table were freshly baked bread, fragrant coffee, and Sophie's favorite caramel sauce. Daniel picked up a piece of bread, spread a thick layer of caramel sauce on it and handed it to Sophie. "Try it." Today's caramel sauce is specially made for you. The sweetness is just right. Sophie took the bread, took a bite and showed a satisfied expression on her face. Well, it's delicious. You still understand my taste best. After breakfast, Sophie came to the Warm Corner Café and started a day's work. Although she has become a well-known writer, she is still reluctant to leave this place full of memories. Here she can always capture the most beautiful moments in life and provide a constant source of inspiration for her creation. Sophie, good morning. I heard that your wedding with Daniel is very romantic. Tell us about it. Amy, a frequent customer of the cafe, asked impatiently when she saw Sophie. Haha, actually there is nothing special. It's just a simple wedding in the way we like. But I was really happy that day and felt that I was the happiest person in the world. Sophie replied with a smile, her face full of happy blush. In the cafe, Sophie was busy while sharing her happiness with the guests. Daniel worked hard in a financial company, and his life became more fulfilling and meaningful because of Sophie. Although he was still busy at work, he always took time to come to the cafe to have a cup of coffee with Sophie and chat. The afternoon sun sprinkled on the terrace of the cafe, and Sophie and Daniel sat there, enjoying the rare leisure time. They recalled every bit since they met, and the laughter and tears they had once become the most precious memories at this moment. Do you remember the first time we met? I spilled coffee beans all over the floor, and I must have been very embarrassed in my panic. Sophie said with a smile. Of course I remember. At that time I thought you were very cute, different from the people I met before. Your optimism and enthusiasm attracted me at once. Daniel held Sophie's hand and looked at her affectionately. Actually, I feel the same way. When I first met you I felt that you were very special. Although you look a little serious, there is a kind of warmth and tenderness in your eyes. Sophie leaned on Daniel's shoulder, feeling his body temperature. In addition to enjoying the world of two people, they also actively participated in various activities in the town. Every year during the Pumpkin Festival, they would participate in the pumpkin carving competition together. Although Sophie's works were always crooked, they were full of creativity and could make everyone laugh every time. There was also the town's music festival, where they would walk hand in hand through the crowd, enjoy the wonderful music together and feel the festive atmosphere. As time went by, Sophie's writing career got better and better. Her novels were loved by more and more people, and readers were moved by the stories full of warmth and love in her writing. But Sophie did not become proud and complacent because of this. She still maintained her love for life and her original intention for writing. Dear, I have a new writing inspiration recently and want to share it with you. One night Sophie said to Daniel excitedly. Oh, tell me about it, I can't wait to hear it. Daniel put down the book in his hand and looked at Sophie intently. Sophie picked up her notebook and began to talk about her new idea. Daniel listened carefully, and from time to time he put forward some of his own ideas and suggestions. They discussed one after another, and it was late at night before they knew it. In this town full of love, Sophie and Daniel's life is like a beautiful movement, and every note is beating with a happy melody. They have experienced ups and downs together, and have also harvested a lot of happiness and sweetness together. In the days to come, they will continue to move forward hand in hand and create more beautiful memories that belong to them just as they promised, and they will always be happy.